The champagne flute slipped from Dana's fingers and shattered on the parquet, and for one held breath, nobody in the Fort Hayes ballroom moved. Not the general mid-sentence, not the aides, not the 200 officers who'd just heard him ask the cripple in the corner to state your call sign for us, sweetheart. I was the cripple in the corner. 41 years old, a cane I'd checked at the coat closet out of pride, a left leg that no longer bent the way a leg is supposed to. They had told me to wear the dress blues, so I wore them. What the general did not know, what none of the 200 knew, was that before the doors of that ballroom closed, he would be standing at attention in front of all of them, holding a salute he could not take back. And a citation that had stayed sealed for 11 years would be read out loud in that room, every measured line of it. But that part comes later. I was not the desk hire he'd been told I was. Not a name a staffer had penciled onto the seating chart to round out a photograph. Not the quiet woman in the corner who had borrowed a uniform she hadn't earned. I just hadn't corrected him yet. He let the question hang in the air where everyone could see it. "We're all waiting, sweetheart," he said, and a few people laughed because he wore 4 stars, and you laugh when a man with 4 stars wants you to. So I answered. 2 words. Flat, the way you would read off a map coordinate. Iron vow. Over by the bar, an old pilot set his drink down very slowly and said, "To nobody, the bird that came home twice." And at the double doors, the command sergeant major, who had been greeting guests all evening, went still as a fence post, and his hand moved to the inside of his coat where he had been carrying a sealed envelope since 6 o'clock. The general was still smiling. He was the only person in that room who did not yet understand what he had just done. I almost didn't go that night. Let me back up to the 6 hours before the glass broke. The morning of the gala, I stood in front of the closet for a long time. The blues hung at the back under a dry cleaner's plastic, where they had hung for 3 years. I took them down. I pinned the wings above the left pocket, the silver aviator wings I had earned at Fort Rucker when I was 24, and certain the worst thing that could happen to me was washing out of flight school. I pressed the trousers on the kitchen table. I decided, standing there, that I would leave the cane at the door. Pride is a foolish thing to carry to a party. I brought it anyway. I rent the top floor of a brick walk-up on Beck Street in German Village, where the sidewalks are old brick, laid in herringbone, and they will catch a cane if you let your mind wander. 2 rooms, a kettle, a patch of Schiller Park out the window if I lean. On good days, I walk down to the river, the Scioto Mile, and watch the brown water go by Columbus the way it has since before any of us. $840 a month, which on a medical retirement is more arithmetic than anyone warns you it will be. The Army let me go at 38. A medical board, 3 doctors and a folder, decided that a chief warrant officer who could not pass a flight, physical, was finished flying, and a pilot who could not fly was mostly paperwork. They were polite about it. The Army usually is. They gave me a pin, a handshake, and a percentage, and I came back to Columbus and taught the leg how to work on brick. The leg is the part people can see, so the leg is the part they ask about, when they ask at all. I tell them I was in a helicopter that had a bad day. That is true, and it is the smallest true thing I know how to say. The rest of it lives in a folder with a stamp on the cover, and for 11 years that stamp meant nobody outside a short list of names was cleared to read what happened that morning near Kandahar, including me, especially me. I kept one thing in my right coat pocket through all of it. A challenge coin, heavy as 2 stacked quarters, the kind they hand out by the boxful, except this one was engraved on a single side. The other face was smooth and blank, and that was on purpose. I turned it over with my thumb when I was thinking, the way some people work a worry stone. I had been turning it for 11 years. I will tell you what is on it when it matters. The invitation came in October on cream cardstock with a gold edge. A retirement gala for the outgoing post commander, dress uniform or black tie, the officers' club at Fort Hayes. My name was on the list because a clerk somewhere ran a roster, not because a single soul wanted me in the room. I knew that. I nearly dropped it in the recycling with the grocery flyers. I went because a man named Elias Vance asked me to. Command Sergeant Major Vance, retired, 61 years old, 2 inches shorter than me, and built like a fire hydrant somebody had painted army green. He called the apartment in November. I had not heard his voice in years, and I still knew it inside one word. We had been on the same aircraft once, on the worst morning either of us would ever have, and you do not forget a man you carried. He said he would be working the door that night as a favor to the club. He said, "Wear the blues, Chief, just once. Let them get a good look at you." I told him I would think about it. He said he would save me a seat where I could see the whole room. I should have asked him why. Vance was casualty number 2 that morning. He had never once let me thank him for being alive, which is its own kind of stubborn. He had spent a good part of the last 11 years asking quiet questions and keeping careful copies of the answers. I did not learn that until later. The host of the gala was a 4-star general named Roy Castellan. I had never served a day under him. Almost no one in that ballroom had, in the way that counts, because General Castellan had never flown anything in his life. 30-some years in uniform and not 1 hour where the ground left his boots. He had come up through staff and budget and the correct dinners, and he had grown very good at the only skill that outlives a peacetime career, which is making certain a room never forgets who outranks it. I rode up 4th Street and over toward Cleveland Avenue, where Fort Hays sits behind its old orange brick walls, like a slab of the city that forgot to modernize. The Hays Armory loomed up out of the dark, that tall shot tower brick gone the color of dried rust under the lights. Inside, the ballroom was all crystal and white linen and a brass quartet playing something with the edges sanded off. Dress blues and mess dress, miniature medals throwing little hooks of light, waiters with trays held flat at the shoulder. The whole place smelled of warm bread, candle wax, and too much cologne. Vance met me at the doors in his own dark suit, a retired man's version of standing at attention. He looked at the wings on my chest, and something moved in his face and then went still again. "There she is," he said, quiet, like he was confirming it to himself. He took my coat. He did not say a word about the cane I had left at the closet. He had watched me decide, and he gave me the smallest nod, the way one soldier tells another that a hard call was the right one. Then he walked me in. Down along the far wall on folding chairs that matched nothing else in the room, they had seated the old ones, retired enlisted, gray crew chiefs with their hands folded in their laps, a couple of wheelchairs, a man with a Vietnam ribbon faded to the color of weak tea. The crystal was for the head table. The folding chairs were for the people who had actually carried things. Nobody said it in those words. Nobody had to. I had been in the room 20 minutes when I watched the general find his first target of the evening. A young lieutenant carrying a folder got too close to the head table, and Castellan stopped him with a raised hand and asked him, loud enough to carry, whether they still taught map reading at West Point these days, or just feelings. The lieutenant turned the color of the tablecloth. The room laughed on cue. That was how the general warmed up a crowd. At somebody else's expense, with a smile so that everyone in earshot learned early it was safer to laugh along with him than to be the next one he looked at. Vance walked me to a chair at the end of the second row, near enough to the head table to hear every word spoken there, far enough back that no photographer would frame me by accident. Before I sat, he squared the chair to the room and lined it up like he was setting a survey marker. "You see everything from here, Chief," he said. Then he went back to the doors, and on the way, I watched him press one hand flat against the front of his coat, the way you check that something is still where you left it. A few people in that room knew me. Not many. A retired colonel caught my eye across the floor and did not smile, because we had both been to a place that does not leave you smiling. A flight surgeon I recognized went a shade pale and suddenly needed to be somewhere on the other side of the bar. That is the thing about a small enough world. The people who wrote you off and the people who cannot meet your eye end up at the same party, and they pretend not to know one another. I turned the coin over in my pocket. Smooth side, engraved side. smooth side, engraved side. There was a young woman 2 chairs down from me, a captain by her rank, new enough that the uniform still looked like it came out of a box. She leaned over and asked, kindly, the way you would speak to somebody's grandmother, whether I had a family member serving tonight. I said no. She asked what had brought me out. I said, an old friend at the door. She smiled and let it go, and I did not correct her, because the evening was young and I had spent 11 years learning that silence costs less than explanation. The speeches started after the plates were cleared. Toasts to the outgoing commander, a slideshow, a chaplain, the usual warm nothing. Then somebody handed General Callsign the small brass microphone, and he did what men like him do with a microphone and 200 people who have to listen. He took the room. He told stories that set himself at the center of every one of them. And somewhere in the middle of his own voice, he got bored, the way a man like that always gets bored. And a bored man with a microphone goes looking for someone to play with. He leaned toward an aide at his elbow, a young major with a haircut like a fresh edge. I watched the major's eyes track down the length of the room and land on me, and I watched him say something low from behind his hand. The general looked. He found me, the cane I was not holding. The leg held a little too straight beneath the table, the warrant officer's blues and the silver wings above the pocket that I had never once taken off. And General Roy Callsign smiled the same smile he had given the lieutenant, only wider, because I was the better prize. He turned the brass microphone toward my corner of the room. 200 faces turned with it to find whatever it was he had found. He let his eyes travel the length of me slow, the way a man prices a used car he has already decided not to buy. Then he smiled wider and gave the room what it had come to him for. Ladies and gentlemen, he said into the little brass microphone, and his voice filled the ballroom the way warm water fills a basin. Easy, unhurried, certain of itself, it appears we have a celebrity sitting in the folding chairs. A ripple of laughter went around the room. Light, uncertain. The kind of laughter that travels when people are not yet sure who the joke will land on, but want the credit for being in on it early. Now, I want everyone to understand, Callsign went on, I have spent 31 years in this army. 31. And in 31 years, a man develops a certain nose, a feel for the genuine article. You learn to tell, across a crowded room, the soldier who has been somewhere from the soldier who has been to meetings. He paused for the chuckle, and he got it. And I look over there at the wings on that uniform and I think to myself, well, isn't that something? I kept my eyes on him. I did not look away and I did not look down at the silver wings above my pocket. I had pinned them on at a kitchen table that morning with steady hands, and I was not going to let this man teach my hands to shake at a party. Tell me, honey, he said, leaning into the microphone, talking to me now and to all of them at once. Where exactly did you earn those? Fort Rucker? He said the name of the place the way you would say the punchline before the joke, smiling at his own aides. Or did they come with the uniform? Because I have to be honest with the good people in this room. We have got a real problem in the modern army, and the problem is that we hand out a great deal of silver to a great many people who would not know the cyclic from a casserole dish. The laughter this time was louder. Somewhere to my left, a fork touched a plate, and the sound of it was enormous. I felt the coin in my right pocket against my fingers. Smooth side, engraved side. I turned it once, slow, the way I had turned it 10,000 times, and I let him keep talking, because a man like that has only one move, and it is to keep talking. And the longer he talked, the more rope he was paying out into that bright crystal room, without the first idea what was tied to the other end of it. I'll tell you what she is, Callsign said, sweeping the microphone toward me like a man pointing out a poor cut of meat to a butcher. And I say this with all the affection in the world. She is what they send us now instead of pilots. A desk hire. Somebody's brochure. The kind of officer we pin a ribbon on so the recruiting poster looks the right way, and then we sit her in a corner where she can't bend the airframe. He let that one breathe. Borrowed blues and a borrowed story. Am I close, sweetheart? You can tell me. We're all friends here. I said nothing. Over at the door, Elias Vance had gone very still. I could see him past the shoulder of a waiter, a short, broad man in a dark suit, and his face had stopped doing any of the small things a face does in a crowd. His right hand had come up flat against the front of his coat, over the breast, and it stayed there. He was not reaching for his heart. He was holding something steady, the way you hold a thing you have carried a long way and are almost ready to set down. The young captain 2 chairs from me had gone pale. She was looking at me now and not at the general, and there was something in her face that had not been there when she asked me kindly whether I had family serving. She had done the arithmetic the way young officers do, fast, and she had come up with the wrong answer. The same wrong answer the general had, and some part of her had begun to suspect it was wrong without yet knowing why. Nothing to say. Castellan spread his hands to the room, mock-wounded, delighted. She's shy. That's all right. We can do this the easy way. I just have the one question, and then I promise we'll let the lady get back to her evening. He set both forearms on the head table and looked at me down the length of all that white linen and all that silver. 200 faces strung out between us like beads on a wire. Every real aviator in this man's army has a call sign. Every single one. It's the one thing you can't fake, because somebody else gives it to you and it sticks whether you like it or not. He smiled. So go on. Stand up. Let the whole room hear it. State your call sign for us, sweetheart. There it was. He had set it down in the middle of the floor where everyone could see it, the way a man drops a glove, and he leaned back and folded his arms and waited to watch me have nothing. You have probably already guessed the 2 words I was going to say. I will tell you now that you have not guessed what those 2 words were going to do to that room. I did not stand right away. I sat in that folding chair with my bad leg held a little too straight beneath the table, and I let the silence get long. I had spent 11 years learning the price of silence, and I knew to the penny that it cost less than explanation, and I knew one more thing the general did not, which is that a quiet that goes on a half-second too long will turn a laughing room nervous all on its own. The chuckling thinned. Somebody coughed. The brass quartet had stopped between numbers, and nobody had told them to start again. I had been holding a flute of champagne I never meant to drink, just something to give my hands a job. And as I drew the first breath to answer him, my fingers, which had not shaken once all evening, opened. The glass slipped. It fell maybe 2 feet and struck the old parquet and broke apart with a bright, hard sound that went off in that hush, like a dropped wrench in a hanger. Pale wine ran out across the wood. A waiter started forward and then thought better of it and stood where he was. Nobody moved. Not the general, mid-smile, not the major at his elbow, not the 200 officers who had just been handed permission to laugh at the woman in the corner. They were all of them looking at me now, and the champagne was still spreading. And into that held breath, I gave him his answer. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice. I said it the way you read a coordinate off a map to a crew that needs it right the first time. Flat. 2 words. Iron vow. For a moment, nothing happened. The way nothing happens in the half-second after you touch a live wire and before the current finds you. Then, over by the bar, an old man set his drink down on the wood, very slowly and very carefully, as though the glass had become something that might go off. He was a pilot. You can always tell the old pilots. They have a way of holding their heads, a little tilted like they are still listening for an engine. He was not looking at the general. He was looking at me, and his mouth had come open, and what he said he did not say to anyone. He said it to the air in front of him, in the voice of a man naming something he had been certain he would never hear, named out loud in his life. the bird that came home twice. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The room had gone so still that the words walked across it from one wall to the other, and you could see them land. You could watch them land on face after face. The retired colonel, who had not smiled at me all night, closed his eyes. The flight surgeon, who had needed so badly to be on the other side of the bar, set his hand on the bar to steady himself. An older sergeant near the wall came up out of the folding chair beside the man with the faded Vietnam ribbon, came up onto his feet without seeming to decide to do it, and stood there, not sure yet what he meant to do, only that sitting was no longer something his body was willing to do. General Roy Castellan was still smiling. He was, at that moment, the only person in the upper half of that room who did not yet understand what had happened. And you could see the smile straining to stay where he had put it, because some animal part of him had felt the temperature of the room drop, and the rest of him had not yet been told why. He gave a small laugh, a recovery laugh, and reached for the microphone again. "Iron vow," he repeated, and he tried to make it light, tried to set it bouncing the way his other lines had bounced. Well, that's a very dramatic little... He did not finish it, because the short, broad man at the door had taken his hand off his chest, and he had stepped down off the threshold and into the room. And he was walking up the center of that ballroom between the long tables, and there was something in the way Command Sergeant Major Elias Vance was walking that closed every last mouth it passed. He was 61 years old and built like a fire hydrant, and he was crossing that floor with the slow, square deliberation of a man approaching a flag, and his right hand had gone back inside his coat, and this time it came out with the thing he had been carrying since 6 o'clock. A flat manila envelope, sealed, soft at the corners from a coat pocket, with a stamp on the face of it that even from the second row I could see was the kind of stamp that means a short list of names and a locked drawer. He stopped in the open floor between me and the head table, in the place where the general had dropped his glove, and he turned so that he was facing not me, and not quite the general, but the whole long room at once. He set his heels together. He brought his hand up off the seam of his trousers, slow and exact, and the old crew chiefs along the wall knew what was coming, a half beat before it came. And one by one they began, painfully, the gray and the wheelchaired and the ribboned, to get to their feet. And Command Sergeant Major Elias Vance retired. Casualty number 2 on the worst morning of both our lives, came to attention in the middle of that crystal ballroom, and held it, and the manila envelope was in his left hand, and the general's smile finally, completely came apart. For a moment that stretched well past comfort. Command Sergeant Major Elias Vance held the position and said nothing, and the holding of it became the loudest thing in that bright room. He was not a tall man. He stood maybe 5'7" in his good shoes, built low and square the way some men are built who have spent a life lifting other men, and the crystal overhead threw little broken points of light down across the gray of his close-cut hair. He had set his heels together in the open floor where the general had dropped his glove, and he waited. He waited until he was certain that every eye in that ballroom had left me and the general both, and come to rest on him. Only then did he speak. General Castellan. His voice was not loud. It had the flat, even carry of a man who had spent 30 years making himself understood down the length of a flight line without ever once raising it. My name is Elias Vance, Command Sergeant Major, United States Army, retired. I shook your hand at that door an hour and a half ago. You did not ask my name, sir, and that is all right, because most nights I would rather you didn't. A chair scraped somewhere along the wall and went still. But you have just asked that lady a question, Vance said, in front of 200 people, for sport. And she is too disciplined a soldier to answer it the way it ought to be answered. So with this room's leave, General, I am going to answer it for her, because I am one of the 2 reasons she has a call sign at all. He did not look at me. I was grateful for that. I do not think I could have held my face together if he had looked at me right then. 11 years ago this spring, he said. Before sunup outside of Kandahar, there was a bird in the air that should not have been in the air. The weather was bad. The dark was worse. There were men on the ground who had run clean out of time, and there was a tasking that 2 other crews had already looked at and been waved off of, because looked at, honestly, it could not be done. He paused. Chief Warrant Officer. 3 Dana Holloway took it anyway. She put that helicopter down into a place no instructor would ever have let her practice, at 4 o'clock in the morning, with the field still hot. The word hot meant a particular thing to the half of that room that had been somewhere, and you could see it land on them, and you could see the other half watch the first half go quiet and understand that they had just missed something. They took a hit going in, Vance said. A bad one. The kind that ends the conversation for most aircraft and most pilots. The book says you turn around when that happens. She did not turn around. She finished setting it down, and she held it down, steady, while they loaded the wounded. The first man they carried aboard that morning has grandchildren now who would not be drawing breath on this earth otherwise. And the second man they carried aboard that helicopter, the second one, was me. 200 people did not breathe. We took the second hit on the way out, Vance said. Same bird, already broken, already carrying more than it was built to carry, already a machine that by every law of metal had no business holding together. And it held together anyway, in her hands, long enough to clear the bad ground and long enough to set us down where the doctors were. The crews that watched it cross the wire that morning, sir, the men on that line who saw the state of it when it came back in, they did not have a word for what they were looking at. So they made one. They called it the bird that came home twice. Hit twice. Came home anyway. Twice. Over at the bar, the old pilot who had said those very words into the air a few minutes before set his hand flat against his own chest and bowed his head, and I understood then that he had been on that line 11 years ago, that he had watched it come across the wire, that he had carried the phrase all this way, the same as Vance had carried his envelope, waiting for somewhere to set it down. Iron vow, Vance said, and he turned the 2 words over slow. The way you handle a thing you have kept a long time in a safe place. That is not a stage name, General. That is not borrowed. That call sign is written into the after-action record of that morning in language the United States Army does not spend lightly. And it has been sitting in a sealed file for 11 years, because the work it belongs to was not a thing that could be spoken of in open rooms, until 91 days ago. He raised the flat manila envelope so the whole room could see it, the soft worn corners, the stamp across its face, when a portion of that record was declassified, and a copy was mailed to the survivors and the next of kin. And I have carried mine inside my coat to every gathering I thought she might walk into for 91 days, on the one chance I would get to read it out loud somewhere it might do her some good. He looked at the general then, for the first time, full on. I did not expect, he said, that the man who finally handed me the opening would be wearing 4 stars. He worked his thumb beneath the flap. The sound of the paper giving way was, in that hush, about the size the breaking glass had been. He drew out a single folded sheet, the heavy kind, and he opened it with both hands and held it at the careful distance a man his age holds a thing he means to read true. And he read it in the slow, deliberate voice of a man who has practiced the words enough times that he no longer trusts himself to rush them. For extraordinary heroism while participating in aerial flight, he read, in the early morning hours over Kandahar province, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Dana Holloway, in command of a medical evacuation aircraft, volunteered to recover wounded personnel from a position under direct fire after 2 prior attempts had been turned back. With full knowledge that her aircraft had sustained critical damage on approach, Chief Holloway elected to complete the recovery rather than withdraw. I had never once heard the words out loud. I had read them on paper, a single time, At my own kitchen table in German Village, with the radiator knocking and the early traffic going by on the brick down below, and I had folded the paper back up and put it in a drawer beneath the dish towels where I would not have to look at it again. Hearing them now in a room, in a voice, in Elias Vance's voice, was an entirely different thing. I kept my eyes forward and I turned the coin once in my pocket. Smooth side, engraved side. Despite the damage to her aircraft and a second strike sustained during egress, Vance read, and his voice did the smallest thing on the word egress and then held. Chief Holloway maintained control of a failing airframe through skill the reviewing officers were unable to fully account for by training alone, and returned her crew and her wounded to friendly lines. Her actions were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon herself, her unit, and the United States Army. He lowered the paper. "It does not say the rest," he said quietly, and now he was not reading anything. A citation never says the rest. It does not say what that morning cost her. It does not say what it took out of her own body that the doctors then spent 2 years arguing over in a room she was not permitted to sit in, the same room that ended her flying for good. And it does not say why a woman who did that, who is that, has spent 11 years letting people sit her in a folding chair at the back and call her whatever they decide she is, sooner than ever once say the name out loud herself. Here is the part I had never told a living soul, and I am only telling it now because Elias said the first half of it in that ballroom, and the second half belongs beside the first. I never said the call sign because the call sign was a promise, and there is a corner of that promise I was not able to keep. When I was a young woman first learning to fly the very aircraft I would one day put down in that field, an old chief warrant told me the only thing a medevac pilot truly owns is the word that she will come when she is called, not that she will win. You cannot promise anybody you will win, only that you will come. I took that harder to heart than I have ever taken anything in my life, and somewhere across those years, it stopped being a thing I believed and quietly became a thing I was, and the men I flew with started saying it back to me like a joke that was not a joke, that Holloway would come for you, that Holloway gave her word, and the word followed me onto the roster as a call sign the way the real ones always do, the ones nobody lets you choose. Iron Vow. And on the worst morning of my life, I came when I was called. I put it down in that field and I held it together with daylight showing through it, and I carried home every soul I could reach with these 2 hands. There were souls that morning I could not reach. That is the whole of what I will ever say about it, because the safety of people still living asks me to say no more, and because some weights do not get 1 ounce lighter for being described out loud. The medal is for the 2 I carried out. And I have never in 11 years been able to lift it out of that drawer without also feeling the exact shape and number of the ones I did not. And a person cannot stand up at a party and announce a call sign that means I keep my word, when there is one corner of her own heart that has quietly called her a liar every single morning since. So I put the name away in a drawer with a coin, and I let the world seat me at the back, and I learned that the back of a room is a survivable place to live, so long as you stop expecting it to be anything kinder than that. But Elias Vance had just taken that choice out of my hands, the way I had once taken a far heavier one out of his, and the room he had set it into was no longer the room General Roy Castellan had been performing for a handful of minutes earlier. All down the walls where the folding chairs were, the old men were on their feet. They had risen the slow way, the way that plainly costs them something now, the gray ones and the ones leaning on canes, and the man with the faded Vietnam ribbon from a war 30 years older than mine, and the older sergeant who had stood beside him, and not one of them was looking at the general any longer. The retired colonel who had not smiled at me all evening stood with his chin level and his eyes bright and wet, holding himself the way a man holds himself when standing is the only thing he has left to give somebody. The flight surgeon had both hands on the bar, the young captain 2 chairs from me. The one who had asked me so kindly whether I had family serving tonight had come halfway up out of her own chair without seeming to know she was doing it. One hand pressed flat across her mouth, and over the top of that hand she was looking at me with her whole young face rearranged, doing the arithmetic over again and arriving, this time, at the right answer. And General Roy Castellan stood alone at his head table in the middle of all of it. The little brass microphone forgotten and still live in his hand, and he watched 200 people he outranked rise to their feet for a woman he had called a desk hire 90 seconds before. The smile was long gone. What sat on his face now was the face of a man who has just been read the full price of a thing, some moments after he finished spending it. He opened his mouth. Nothing at all came out of it. He closed it again. And in my pocket, my thumb found the coin and went still against the side that carries no picture, the smooth side, the side I have worn down with 11 years of doing exactly this in exactly this kind of silence. I understood that the moment I had spent the whole of my adult life walking the long way around had come and found me anyway, in a rented ballroom in Columbus, on an ordinary Tuesday in spring, and that there was only one thing left in me that was fit to set down into a quiet that size, and it was not a word at all. It was the coin. I drew my hand up out of my pocket, and with my bad leg held a little too straight beneath that long white table, I began to stand. The bad leg did not want it. It never does, not first thing, not when it has spent 2 hours folded under a banquet table going cold. And there was a moment in the rising of me where I had to set my knuckles down flat against the white cloth and let that table carry a share of my weight that I would rather, in front of all those people, it had not. Nobody made a sound at it. An hour earlier, somebody in that hall might have found it funny, the gray pilot levering herself up out of her chair like a woman twice her age. Now, 200 officers only watched me hunt for my own feet, and they watched the way you watch a thing you have all at once and all together, and without a single word passing between you, decided to be careful with. I did not say anything. There was nothing left standing in me that was shaped like a sentence, and there did not need to be. Elias had already put a voice to the part that needed one, and a person ought to know the moment when her own talking would do nothing but smudge what a finer hand has already set down clean. So I came out from behind that long head table the slow way, around the end of it rather than past the general, and I went down into the open center of the ballroom, into the cleared floor where his question still lay between us, like a thing thrown down and not yet picked up, and I walked toward him with the bad leg telling the plain truth about itself at every step, which is to say, with a hitch and a drag that the whole room could see, and that not one soul in it any longer had the smallest inclination to mistake for anything less than the cost of something. Off to my right, on the parquet near the foot of the dais, the little spray of broken crystal from the flute I had let slip, at the very start of all this, was still where it had fallen. One of the catering staff had laid a folded white napkin over it but had not yet swept it up, and I stepped wide around it the way you step wide around a thing that has already opened your skin once and that you do not intend to let do it again. It is a strange piece of arithmetic that a whole life can pivot in the time it takes a glass to leave your fingers and find the floor, and that the glass can still be lying there, unswept, when the life on the other side of it has already become a different life. I came up to the head table, and I stopped. Roy Castellan stood on the far side of it, 4 stars on each shoulder, and a little brass microphone gone dead and forgotten in his fist, and from arm's length he was a good deal older than the stage-managed shine of him had let on from the back of the room. There was a soft loosening under his jaw that the spotlights had hidden, and a wedding band worn down to a thread of gold, and the particular stillness of a man who has spent the whole arc of a career being the most consequential person in every room he has ever walked into, and who does not carry, anywhere in all that braid, the smallest map for how to be the least. I brought my hand up out of my pocket, and the coin came with it. It is a plain thing to hold, brass, gone dark and smooth around the rim from 11 years of the one thumb working it. One face of it has been rubbed blank as a creek stone, worn past whatever picture it might once have carried, because that is the face I keep turned out against my fingers in a long room, the nothing face, the one that asks nothing back of me. The other face is cut. 2 short lines, no flourish, no seal, the kind of marking a man scratches into metal at a field shop with a borrowed tool because there is no gentler way left to him to say the thing. One word above, Kandahar, and below it, the hour, in the 4 blunt figures the army keeps for the times of day, it would rather not say out loud. Oh, 400. I set it down on the white cloth in the space between us, on the cut side, and then I laid one finger on it and turned it slow until the 2 lines sat square to him, so that the only reading of it left in the world that mattered was the one he was about to do, and I lifted my finger away and left it lying there in the warm, bright nothing where his dead microphone had been holding court a few minutes before. He looked down at it. I watched him take in the one word and then drop to the hour beneath it, and I watched the 4 figures do to Roy Castellan exactly what they always do, because there is not a soldier breathing, flyer or not, war or not, who does not know in the meat of him what that hour means, the hour with no light in it, the hour when the only calls that come are the ones nobody on God's earth wants to take. He had never flown, he had never gone to the bad places himself, but he had spent 40 years signing the paper that sent other people to them. And a man does not do that without learning, somewhere down where he cannot reach to scrub it out, the exact sound of that particular time of the morning. For a long moment, the general did not move at all. Then he set the microphone down on the linen, carefully, deliberately, the way you lay down a thing you have just understood you no longer have any standing to be holding. He squared his shoulders. He brought his heels in. And there, in front of 200 of his own officers, in front of every white head ranged along the walls, the 4-star general who 1/4 of an hour earlier had ordered me to turn my own name into a joke, for the amusement of the room, lifted his right hand slow and level to the brim of his brow, and he held it there, for me, and his hand, I will tell you, was not steady in the holding of it. Chief Holloway. He pitched it low, just across the cloth, though the room was so far past silence by then that it carried to the back wall anyway. I did not know. I could have left him standing in it. The room would have let me, gladly. There was a version of that evening, and I felt it go by me close, where I let Roy Castellan hold a salute over the wreck of his own party until the band got embarrassed and somebody thought to bring the house lights up. I had earned that version, but I have spent the better part of 11 years being decided about and sorted and seated by men who did not know, and somewhere in those years I came to learn the exact and particular weight of not knowing, and how it is a wholly separate thing from not caring, even on the nights it lands on you the very same. So I gave him the one thing I had on me that was worth the giving. "No, sir," I said. "You didn't. Most don't. It was not a thing you were ever cleared to know." And I brought my own hand up, the right one, the one that had set the coin down, and I returned his salute. Because the stars were real, and he had bled a whole career to earn them, even if he had not bled the hour. And because the surest way I have ever found to make a small man into a larger one is to hand him back, whole and unbroken, the precise size of the gesture he just found, late and in public, the courage to make. He brought his hand down. Something crossed his face that I have never owned a clean word for, that I have only ever seen settle on men who have just grasped, fully and a long way too late, the dimensions of a thing they went and broke with their own mouth. And he said it again, lower, almost not aloud, so that I think I was the only living person who actually caught the shape of it. I am sorry. Not to the room, to me. I gave him back a single nod, the small economical kind, and I let that be the whole of it because being sorry is a heavier load when a crowd makes you carry it across open ground. And he had a long, quiet drive home ahead of him in which to feel every pound of his. Then Roy Castellan did the only thing left in that hall that could carry any freight at all. He turned from me to the young major standing frozen at his shoulder, a staff officer gone the gray-white of typing paper, and he did not make an announcement of it, did not reach back for the microphone he had just put down. He put his hand out, and across the floor Command Sergeant Major Elias Vance came, unhurried, square and low to the ground as he had stood all night, and he laid the heavy folded citation into the general's open palm, and the general carried it himself, with his own 2 hands, to the draped side table near the wall where the unit's history lay open under a sheet of glass. The big leather ledger they bring out for nights like this one, the book that holds the names of the gone and the short, flat accountings of what each of them did to get into it. He lifted the glass off. He set the citation down against the open page and pressed the old fold flat with the heel of his hand. He took up the pen that lives in the gutter of that book. He wrote the date, this night. And beneath the date, he wrote a second line, a short one. The line that starts the slow machinery turning, a request for the correction of a soldier's record, the form the Army keeps for the purpose, the one they call a DD-149, the one that would travel that same week to Army Human Resources Command and put into the permanent file of Chief Warrant Officer 3 Dana Holloway, the morning that a medical board in a room I was never let to sit in had until tonight allowed to stand in that file as nothing but the reason they took my wings. He signed it, the whole long weight of his name, all 4 stars of it, on a line whose only meaning was that the next set of eyes to open my file would meet the pilot a good beat before they ever met the leg. The young captain who had asked me earlier, so kindly and so wide of the mark, whether I had anybody of my own serving tonight, was watching the general write, and she was weeping without one particle of shame about it, and she had not sat back down, and she did not look away from any of it. I would carry her face out of that room with me. Of that much I was already certain. I went back to the head table, and I took up my coin off the white cloth, because it is mine, and because the saying of a thing out loud at last does not mean you set it down and walk off lighter. It means only that you have finally won the right to carry it in the open hand instead of the closed pocket. I shut my fingers around it, the cut side and the worn side both pressed into my palm at once, and I felt the little warmth still in it that the cold linen had not been given the time to steal. I made no speech. I have never in all my life made one, and I was not about to learn the trick of it in a rented ballroom on the old grounds of the Hayes Armory, with my leg, by then gone stiff as a fence rail, beneath me. I turned, and I went back up the center of that long room the way I had come down it, and the gray men along both walls were on their feet yet, and as I drew level with each one of them, he came to attention, slow and plainly costing him, the unsmiling colonel, the flight surgeon with both his hands, come off the bar at last, the old pilot who had carried the name of my last aircraft locked up in his chest for 11 years and turned it loose tonight, the stooped man with the faded ribbon from a colder and farther war than mine, every last one of them, a long, still passage of old soldiers standing the whole length of that hall for me, and I gave them the only courtesy in me that would not have broken me to give, which was to hold my eyes level and my chin up and let them finish doing it. Elias Vance was at the doors. Of course he was. He had kept those doors all night, and he kept them now, and the manila envelope was back inside his coat, empty and folded once over his heart, where it had ridden for 91 days. and he did not salute me, because the two of us are a long way past saluting, Elias and I. We are the two who came back. He only set his hand to the big brass handle and drew the door open, the last and the plainest of all the offices he had performed that night, and he held it for me. And as I came even with him, he said it quiet, meant for no one but me. "Took you long enough, Chief." "Took the both of us," I said, and I went out through it, down the wide stone steps and into the Columbus night, into the cold coming up off the Scioto and over the rise, with the brick streets of German village laid out and waiting below me, and my own dark walk-up at the top of its narrow stair, and behind me the gold light of the ballroom and the standing men and the general held inside his salute. The heavy doors swung shut at my back. Through the glass, Roy Castellan was saluting still,